welcome to the second webinar in the USB series, Unpacking Commercial Milk Formula Marketing. Today's session is Commercial Formula Marketing, Communities, and Emergencies. Now I'm going to hand it over to Amelia Pismythe-Seeger, our moderator for today and U.S. Breastfeeding Committee's Deputy Director.
Oh, and thank you so much, Alyssa, and welcome everyone. We're so pleased to be sharing the second in this webinar series related to understanding the International Code for the Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes. So we want to start with just a little recap about how we got here. So at USBC, we believe that to create large-scale systems change together, we're going to have to be on a shared learning journey with one another in order to be able to discern what needs to be done, and if we have the capacity and the will and the readiness to do the work that's up. So we began by learning from our members with a 2019 survey. And the results of that survey showed us that we had a very fractured understanding of the code. So in early 2020, we began to plan this webinar series to support that shared learning journey. And in late 2020, member organizations expressed an interest in active engagement on the topic. So at the start of this year, we came together for what's called an incubation conversation, where organizations that identified that they had the capacity, the will, and the interest and the expertise began a conversation to see if it would be time for collective action. Next slide. So this is the shared learning journey that we are expanding beyond the membership and those who self-selected into the incubation conversation, and that we're sharing broadly with the first food field. The webinar series as a whole is Unpacking Commercial Milk Formula Marketing, Communities, Contexts, and Impacts. This is the second webinar in the series, and the focus today is specifically on communities and emergencies. So I want to set a little context for today's session. At our first webinar, we heard from Larry Gummerstrand of the World Health Organization and Rachel Crosley from the Access to Nutrition Initiative. And they set an international context for us to really help us broadly understand both what the code is, what the code isn't, and some of what is emerging on the international front related to this topic. Now, today we're going to zoom in and really look at what's happening in US communities, and in particular, the ways that different communities are having different experiences. If ultimately we determine that we want to create real change together, we need to center the voices of those who are most impacted, and we need to listen, even if the truths are hard or the pain is raw. And so we're delighted to have three speakers today who are going to bring the truth from their view and their community. Next slide, please. So again, today's speakers are Malaika Ludman, Kimmie Bugg, and Lourdes Santabaya. And I'm going to read a brief bio for each prior to their presentations. So Malaika Ludman is a birth doula and certified lactation counselor who holds a master's degree in public health. She's a program coordinator for Birthmark Doula Collective, which recently merged with the New Orleans Breastfeeding Center. Malaika manages the Infant Ready Emergency Infant Feeding Program, is lead coordinator of Community Breastfeeding Grand Rounds, and supervises the collective's first cohort of perinatal community health workers. As a mother of two, she recognizes the value in providing all pregnant and postpartum families with equal access to gentle, supportive, and compassionate care. Before becoming involved in community-based maternal health programs and services, Malaika served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Benin and later spent 5 years working for a global nonprofit organization based in the DC area. We are delighted to have Malaika with us today. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. and I am representing Birthmark Doula Collective, and we are a member-owned cooperative based in New Orleans, Louisiana, and we're a reproductive justice organization that focuses on improving birth outcomes and experiences for pregnant and postpartum families, and we provide support, education, and services in the perinatal year and beyond. And as Amelia mentioned, one of our programs is Infant Ready. It's an emergency preparedness program that has been in the works for a few years now. So I'll be presenting an overview of how formula marketing practices impact communities in emergencies, as well as the various tactics that formula companies use to appeal to consumers and healthcare workers and health systems, as well as policymakers. And I want to open by sharing this brief clip featuring Dr. Aletha Maybank, who is a physician, and she's currently Chief Equity Officer and Vice President of the American Medical Association. This clip shows her in 2013 speaking at a summit on breastfeeding.
What really sparked my passion to wanting our communities to really get the importance of breastfeeding happened post-Katrina, where I read a story about a nurse and she was talking about a family that was stuck on the roof. And the mother had a 1-week-old child. And by the time that rescue workers got to them, the 1-week-old child, they were able to take him to the hospital, but the child died. And the reason why the child died, because they said they ran out of formula. Mom just delivered. Nobody thought about putting this child on the breast. And I said, how are we that so disconnected from, one, as women, what our bodies to me are here to do, but what we've been doing historically. And so it really hit me that there's a lot that we need to do to really raise this consciousness about the importance of breastfeeding and how it's not just about the benefits, but this is how our bodies are built, and this is what we're here to do on this earth as women.
Okay, and what really stands out to me here is when Dr. Maybank states that no one thought to put this 1-week-old baby to the breast. And it's pretty powerful, this statement, showing that formula feeding is almost like a default feeding method. And why is that? It shows how much work there is to do in teaching and reminding people that the healthiest and most nutritious milk comes from the bodies of lactating people, especially in emergency situations. So breast milk is the cleanest and safest food for infants in emergencies, and there is a lot of evidence to show that. The next safest option when breast milk is not available is liquid ready-to-feed formula. And the least safest choice is powdered formula because it's not a sterile product and its use increases the risk of infection. In an emergency, safe formula feeding requires a substantial amount of resources. Families need supplies beyond just formula. They need clean water. They need fuel to heat the water. They need equipment to feed their babies the formula. They need supplies to clean that equipment. They need education on safe formula preparation, and also regular monitoring and medical care. And these resources are not guaranteed in an emergency. So when emergencies happen, people, they want to step up and they want to help, and they want to help the youngest and the most vulnerable. And donations, however, of formula are extremely harmful if they are not coupled with the resources that people need to feed safely. And emergencies disproportionately affect formula-fed infants. Diarrhea, respiratory tract infections, and malnutrition are the leading causes of illness and death in infants in emergencies, and formula feeding exacerbates these outcomes. And headlines like this one here that says, "Sometimes hope looks like a can of formula," can be very misleading. They appear as heartwarming and caring and providing help, but they're actually very much jeopardizing and undermining the value of breastfeeding. So both the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes and the Operational Guidance on Infant and Young Child Feeding in Emergencies prohibit donations of formula in emergencies. But organizations and agencies and the media continue to request and accept these items. And how does this affect our communities? Well, formula donations in emergencies not only harm individuals, but they also affect community health. And we've seen how that plays out in emergency contexts around the world. Widespread distribution of formula reduces breastfeeding rates, and this can have long-lasting effects. There is well-documented evidence from a case study in Armenia in the late 1980s, where the government heavily promoted and distributed formula, and it caused breastfeeding rates to plummet. And it took 10 years before breastfeeding rates returned to the levels they were at before the earthquake. Formula distribution also increases infection rates. And an example here comes from Indonesia in 2006, after an earthquake, when relief workers distributed formula widely to households, regardless of whether they were breastfeeding or not, and they had no instruction on assessment or targeting or safe use. And they found that the rates of diarrhea among infants in households that received formula were double those of infants in households that did not receive formula. And we also find that formula donations that are uncontrolled and widespread increase a dependence on formula, and that puts families in a very food insecure situation. Formula is an expensive product, and it requires money, time, and resources. And when there is a huge disruption to basic services and public health infrastructure, that is a tremendous risk to families. And communities of color are affected differently during disasters in the United States. In non-disaster situations, to begin with, communities of color already have inequitable access to infant and young child feeding services and to high quality medical care. And when there is a disaster, this divide becomes even greater. So the formula industry has been remarkably successful in advertising and selling their products, despite all the research that shows that breast milk is the safest and healthiest option in emergencies. And it is a $70 billion industry. It's dominated by a small number of very powerful multinational corporations that are very skilled and sophisticated when it comes to marketing. They also have powerful lobbying capacity, and they build relationships with policymakers. And that relationship building makes it easier to avoid regulations. And also formula companies appeal to audiences by engaging emotionally, and they are very intentional in their branding and in their targeting. And when public health emergencies happen, formula companies see this as an opportunity to market their products. And unfortunately, this is nothing new. So I'd like to paint a picture of how formula companies market their products in public health emergencies by highlighting the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've all experienced the weight of this pandemic at a very deep emotional level, and we can all relate to the stress and the trauma that it has caused. And formula companies have exploited the COVID-19 pandemic, and there's a lot of evidence to show this. They've donated to individuals and hospitals and government agencies and NGOs on a global scale even though this is clearly prohibited by the international code. And it's also important to point out that formula companies and their marketing have actually received a boost from the healthcare practices and policies that were implemented early in the pandemic. Practices that disrupted lactation, in particular separating parents and infants immediately after birth or withholding skin-to-skin contact. These practices were not based on evidence and they jeopardized breastfeeding. And they also gave formula companies an advantage because they were able to make the argument that, well, it's not safe for mothers to breastfeed, so that prohibition on donations of formula doesn't apply here. So before we continue, I just want to invite you and ask you to think about some of the formula marketing practices and tactics that you may have seen or heard about during the COVID-19 pandemic. And what may have come to mind for you are donations to health facilities or discounts on products. But I'd like to also consider more tactics that have been made apparent. There was a study published in March of this year that looked at the marketing tactics of companies that sell breast milk substitutes. And they looked at these tactics since the start of COVID-19. And the researchers looked at promotional materials and ads and activities from 9 companies in 14 countries, including the United States. And they found 8 themes that emerged that show that companies that sell breast milk substitutes are capitalizing on fear related to COVID-19 by using health claims and misinformation about breastfeeding. In the next few slides, I will be showing or speaking the names of different formula companies. These are not an endorsement of these companies. It's just to show violations to the code. So the first tactic is unfounded health claims on immunity that promote fear. Formula companies emphasize immunity and resilience, and they give the impression that their products can make babies less susceptible to transmission. These pictures here are of screenshots from a Nestle Facebook ad in Pakistan, and they released several short videos when COVID rates were really high. And their ads have claims of immunity. They talk about HMO, which is human milk oligosaccharides. They talk about that being in the formula and helping to boost immunity. They ask fear-provoking questions like, are you worried about your child's immunity? The second tactic that emerged from this study is riding on public health authority to gain legitimacy. And this Facebook post from Vietnam features a headshot of the Director General of the World Health Organization. And this ad gives the false impression that this product can, one, help fight COVID-19, but also including the headshot in the ad gives the impression that the product is endorsed by the World Health Organization and makes it appear more legitimate. The next tactic that emerged was appealing to public sentiment on solidarity and hope. So rather than capitalizing on fear, companies promote messages of hope and resilience. So this is a company formula ad from China, and the text, some of the text translates to conquer virus for love to protect new lives. And there's, a happy face on the pregnant person's belly. And the right side of the image shows items that the company includes in donation packages, like personal protective equipment, samples of formula and milk for mothers, and offers services for pregnant people and families. And also because these companies are linked to charitable organizations, the formula companies themselves have the facade of being charitable. In addition to breast milk substitutes, these companies have also donated supplies related to COVID-19 to healthcare facilities and healthcare workers to generate sales. So this screenshot shows how Nestle donated respirators and hygiene kits and surgical masks to the Ministry of Health in Burkina Faso. And several months before that, they had donated food and beverages to breastfeeding women and children. And again, because these companies that sell breast milk substitutes have partnerships with government agencies and charitable foundations, their promotional tactics appear as if they are being charitable rather than marketing. The next is the use of social media to contact parents. Lockdowns and quarantines have elevated the use of digital platforms to connect with people. Telehealth and telemedicine have become used more frequently, which allow people to seek medical counseling, allow people to connect with other parents and experts. And this example here is from a Danone YouTube video in India, which advised mothers to stay 6 feet away from their babies. You can see that on the second check mark. And they call this YouTube channel the Voice of Experts. So they're positioning themselves as public health experts, and they're suggesting practices like distancing from your infant, which are completely bogus and not founded on any evidence. And baby food companies also are not allowed to make direct contact with parents, but on this channel, they invite parents to subscribe and follow along. Publicly endorsing and promoting breastfeeding has become a popular tactic, and in the context of COVID-19, formula companies and companies that sell bottles and pumps, they can exploit the existing misinformation about breastfeeding to justify donations of supplies. So this here is an example from Medela, a company that manufactures bottles and artificial nipples. And in Kenya, the company titled a post on their Facebook page, "Coronavirus Information for Breastfeeding Moms and Moms-to-Be." And they ask questions like, is it safe to breastfeed if I have coronavirus? And in the caption, they don't explicitly say that breastfeeding is safe and recommended in the context of COVID. They promote bottle feeding without directly promoting breastfeeding. And that's because they are in the business of selling bottles. And their hashtag also directs parents to their pumps and bottles and products. In emergency situations, it's also common for consumers to panic about supply shortages because these do happen. Formula companies take advantage of this sense of fear and panic to reassure and communicate in a very friendly tone that they're here to help. They offer discounts and gifts to consumers. They use very emotionally appealing promotional messages like, "You can count on us. We promise to support your baby and nourish your baby and help." And lastly, the final tactic that emerged from this study was reaching out to health professionals through sponsoring educational events on topics related to COVID-19 and infant and young child feeding. When companies sponsor educational events, it gives the impression that the medical establishment is endorsing the formula company. So this Facebook flyer shows a webinar by the Medical College of the University of the Philippines that was sponsored by Abbott. And their webinar is about pregnancy in the time of COVID-19. And the issue here is that the formula company then has influence over the content that is shared about nutrition and breastfeeding. So as you can see, violations of the international code are everywhere. And in emergency contexts, parents and caregivers are under an extreme amount of stress and are very susceptible to marketing tactics. If you're being told that breastfeeding might not be safe or is hard or uncomfortable, or that your stress can affect your milk, then you can be easily swayed. And so what formula companies are doing is inappropriate and harmful, and implementing the international code is, and ensuring that it has legal backing is one of the most effective ways to help protect, promote, and support breastfeeding. Thank you. I'll turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Malika. It's always lovely having you here. So our next speaker today is Kimmie Bugg. So Dr. Kimmie Bugg is president and CEO of Reaching Our Sisters Everywhere, known as ROSE, and a national nonprofit created in 2011 to address breastfeeding inequities in the African American community. She's also a career perinatal and neonatal nurse professional. Dr. Bugg has spent nearly 4 decades working in the Atlanta metropolitan area and nationally in mostly African American communities, promoting perinatal health, breastfeeding, and community-based impact solutions. And she's known internationally for her work in lactation, anti-racism, and health equity strategies, the nonprofit world, and marginalized community empowerment. And because she asked me to keep her bio very short, I won't tell you about the innumerable awards that she has also received. Called Mama Bugg by individuals near and far, she is a matriarch of the modern day Black breastfeeding movement. Kimmie lives in the Atlanta area with her husband, Dr. George W. Bugg, a neonatologist, as well as her 88-year-old beautiful mother. George and Mama Bugg are the parents of 5 adult children. We're so pleased to have Dr. Mama Bugg with us this morning to share about the impact of commercial milk formula in Black communities in the United States.
Thank you so much. I am going to share my screen. Okay. Okay, now I'm ready. Technology is not my friend. Good afternoon, everyone. And I just want to say thank you so much to my USBC family for keeping me busy and definitely making me to research and continue to grow. I really do appreciate you all so much. So I'm going to talk with you for a few minutes about formula marketing impact in the Black community. And again, the community, you know, we all sort of have our definitions, but the Black community definitely is not a monolith. There are, you know, many aspects of the Black community. So basically, and of course, I'm going to be highlighting and discussing the work that we've done in the African American community over the past 12 or so years. So the first thing I would like to ask you all is marketing done differently in the African American community than in other communities? So with that said, I would like to, first of all, show you this ad from the CDC that says that hospitals give Black babies formula at 9 times the rate of white babies. That's pretty amazing. And also, Sorry. And also on this picture is a crib card that came from a hospital very recently. This was something they are using. And you can see in this hospital, of course, delivers quite a few African-American babies. And you can see on the bottom of the crib card, it says breastfeeding, formula feeding, or both. So I'm sure that many of you thought that, this was something that was from the late 80s or the 90s. And at that time, we definitely did have these cards in our hospital, but this is something that is being used today. On the bottom, you see where it says justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So a lot of the things we're going to talk about includes, of course, those things. JEDI is what we'd like to say. And this is from a book from Dr. Daniel Dawes, who is the director of the Stature Health Leadership Institute at Morehouse College. And he talks a lot about JEDI. He says we have to include justice when we're talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion, especially when discussing the African-American disparities. So I would like to briefly just have a discussion of A Tale of Three Mothers, just to sort of highlight some of the things that go on in communities of color. So this is a young mother who exclusively pumped. Her baby was in the neonatal intensive care unit for about 5 months and never did get the art of going to the breast to be breastfed. But this child only received breast milk for 18 months. You can clearly see that that liquid gold in that receptacle that the baby is drinking from. So she had a lot of problems and concerns and issues every place that she went. If she was in a group of breastfeeding women, they were looking at her funny. But if she was in a group of formula feeding women, they wanted to know, why her formula looked so different than theirs. So she endured this for a really long time and never felt really at home and comfortable in either of these settings. But we, when meeting and talking and working with her and affirming her and letting her know just what a fabulous, wonderful job she was doing. And she was just determined to continue to provide breast milk for her baby. And she did, and he's absolutely fabulous. And, she was actually, when we highlighted the story a few years ago, she was contacted by several media outlets also to sort of give her story about, kind of being out there and not really belonging in either one of those camps, the breastfeeding camp or the bottle feeding camp. But we definitely let her know how wonderful and important she was, and how proud we were of the fact that she was able to provide breast milk for her son for 18 months. So this is another young lady that had some serious concerns and issues and challenges. She breastfed absolutely every place that she went, and got lots and lots of feedback and nasty stares. And, one of the things she coined, and I've used quite a bit, is she said that most of the places that she went when she was breastfeeding her baby, that people would look at her like they were smelling something. and that look on her face all the time. And this was a woman, of course, who was extremely modest, but she definitely breastfed everywhere. And so again, it was not an easy task for her, and she needed to be around women, and she was, that supported her and gave her encouragement, and asked her to continue to do what it was she was doing. And the last little story is this absolutely fabulous woman who is friend to the other two, who is now a veterinarian, I'm told, but her family just thought that this was too difficult because, breastfeeding is just not something that Black women do, is what she got from her family. And that, she was in school and she was just had all this stuff to do. So why burden yourself with this? And, that was something that was near and dear to my heart. As I talked with her, because that's the same story that I heard from my mother, who is now 88 years old and who breastfed me in the 50s. And, I'm going to mention that a little later when we talk about the Folks twins. But my mother was also told that there is this scientific formula. Why do you want to burden yourself with breastfeeding? And so she persisted, and she continued to breastfeed, and also breastfed for a very long time. So these are three pretty beautiful, wonderful success stories. And for each one of these, there are at least 10 more of women who have initiated breastfeeding, who have intended to breastfeed, and did not get out of the hospital breastfeeding. As that first little infographic mentioned, Black women are 9 times more likely for their babies to be supplemented in the hospitals than white babies. So it was still extremely difficult to even get out of the hospital breastfeeding because of the biases and the concerns and just so many things that caused that. So this is a picture of a store in an affluent area in the Atlanta area that I went to visit when preparing for this presentation. And you can see where it says, you just pull this down and what you want comes out. There were rows and rows of these and all kinds of paraphernalia and things all over. So then I went back to my local store. And so there were cards that you would have to pick up and take to the counter, where behind locked glass doors, you could redeem what it is that you wanted to get. So there are a couple of other stores that I visited in the predominantly African-American areas did also have the locked cabinets out on the floors, but you would have to see an associate in order to get the artificial breast milk out of the cases, if that is what it was you were there to purchase. So it was a very different and probably 6-7 miles in the different stores in the metro Atlanta area. So we are very excited and happy and proud of the work that US Baby Friendly is doing. I wanted to just point out on this picture, this is my niece down here in the corner. And she had her first baby, Anala will be 14 on the 6th of June. And I signed up to do all of her prenatal care with her and her prenatal classes. And, you know, I went to most of all of her visits with her. And I just want you all to know that for the next 7 years, I received formula in the mail, coupons in the mail, all types of information and things for artificial breast milk in the mail for 8 years. She had 2 other babies, and I was still receiving things in the mail to get discounts on infant formula. Some of the big concerns in the community is also influencers and brand ambassadors. There are things like Keurigs that are being promoted to, you can put the whole can of stuff on the top and then make what it is that you want or something. And these things are extremely expensive. And it's one of those things that young people want because it is being really touted and put out there by the influencers and the brand ambassadors. They've already kind of mentioned this liquid courage, that, you know, this is what you need to have courage and confidence. And there are all kinds of ads and things, which is my second question to you. Where do you see formula ads on the internet? So also when Chrissy Teigen had her concerns with breastfeeding, which everyone does, many people do, and that's okay. But I just want to say that our organization was bombarded with calls from breastfeeding women saying, why didn't you tell us that breastfeeding is difficult? Why didn't you tell us these things and these things? Which was okay, because of course we were able to answer those questions and affirm those mothers. And, you know, those who wanted to and intended to continue did okay. But just to say that influencers and brand ambassadors and people who are who they are in the celebrity eye truly can make a difference and do make a difference on disparities and resources and questions and concerns that people may have and ask. TikTok, there are, you know, many different ads and things there too. And this was one that I just kind of pulled off. Bottle feeding hacks to make babies' mealtime easier. 15 of them, 15 things to make this one baby's mealtime much easier. So before we show this video, I just want to say that this is definitely for educational purposes only. I'll talk about that when it's over.
Should American babies get an amount of DHA global experts recommend? Enfamil provides it, but Similac gives babies here less than half that amount, while giving babies in other countries more. Switch to Enfamil.
So I just wanted to show that, to say that if they're at each other like that with these targeted negative ads, they definitely market worse than that to Black communities. So social media ads, the question, where do you see these ads? Just about everywhere on all of the different social media platforms. And, you know, of course, young people are on these platforms a lot. And all these reasons given, this is just one for reasons to supplement, because you're going back to work and school. You have more than one baby, or you just want to, as it says down here. So these are definitely influential in communities. So formula market size, and this is too has also been mentioned, is huge and only getting bigger. About $70 million, billion with a B. And I remember when I started doing this work as a bedside breastfeeding counselor, when we would say, artificial breast milk is $1 billion with a B. Industry, it's $2 or $3 billion. And now at this point, we were just told $70 billion and $103 billion in 2026. And about 10 to 15% of those budgets are spent on marketing. And so that's a whole bunch of money to spend on marketing and targeting and focusing in on communities. In 1993, again, I had the opportunity to go to Barbados with Helen Armstrong and UNICEF to actually work with training all of the nurses on like 15 islands that were incorporating the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative. And it was just amazing to see at that time, and really beneficial to me as someone who had not seen baby friendly hospitals in the United States, how wonderful and easy it could be. And at that time, if anyone did want artificial breast milk, they had to bring it into the hospital with them. And of course, that would never fly here because of the capitalistic society that we are and how much money it is that these companies make. So again, breaking news that the exposes U.S. bullying on infant formula. Lots and lots of information about why it is that infant formula marketing is so prevalent in the United States. And of course, it follow the dollar, always follow the dollar. So I wanted to briefly also just mention the fact that of this book. And, I mentioned that I too was a breastfed baby. However, my mother was extremely concerned about what had happened to these twins who were born in 1946. And I was born about 10 years after them, but my mom had watched them be exploited. And these beautiful women were the face of formula in the Black community. And so again, she was told by her physician that, you don't need to burden yourself with that. There's this new scientific formula that is just fine. It's the same. And so don't worry about it. When of course, we know that is definitely not true. The other thing is that the community that I work with, that I serve, has continually asked me when it comes to research matters that they are just exhausted at being the focus of these studies. Everybody is calling us, 2 or 3 times a week saying, can you connect us with the Black community, Black birthing folks, Black breastfeeding women, so that we can do this study and this research and this study. So what our community is saying to us is, instead of that focus that has been going on for so long continuously, they would like for the researchers to instead asking Black women to sign up to be studied, they want you to ask the white researchers, or the researchers to ask white people to sign up to be asked, what will it take for you to provide equitable care to all of the clients that you serve? So what does it take for you to get over your bias to serve the clients, the patients, the birthing people, the mothers that you have been charged with working with to the best of your ability? And so that is something I'm going to continue to ask researchers in the future. Images matter. Images just matter. This is just one of our favorite places. When we could travel, when we used to travel, we would always make sure that we would come look for the nursing pods and make sure, and we really lobbied to make sure that they had something important on here so that folks would know that breastfeeding isn't just a good thing to do, a nice thing to do, that it truly is important. It's not just beneficial. Breastfeeding is important, and we need to truly work on these disparities. And the beautiful little brown babies didn't hurt at all either. So the journey the distance is the same, but what we know is that there are so many obstacles in the pathway of Black women that we have got to really go through a whole bunch of stuff to get to the same place that other folks walk into pretty easily. So privilege is when you think that something is not a problem because it's not a problem to you personally. And that is it. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, please add them to the question and answer.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Mama Bugg. Our third speaker today is Lourdes Santabaya. Lourdes is a community activist and community organizer, having worked previously in the domestic violence and housing equity movements. In Lactation, she has worked as a volunteer peer counselor, IBCLC, mentor, researcher, and trainer. She is the co-founder of Alimentación Segura Infantil, or ASI, an organization focused on increasing breastfeeding, leadership, and training in disenfranchised communities, with a focus on disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. ASI is currently the largest nonprofit community-based infant and young child feeding organization in Puerto Rico, now also providing services in Latin America and the Spanish-speaking US. ASI is also an IBCLC Care Award recipient and a mentorship path for aspiring IBCLCs. Lourdes is active in the USBC, the Infant Feeding and Emergencies Core Group, and the USLCA Advisory Committee, and has received various awards and recognitions in the field for her activism and her research. Amidst 2 Category 5 hurricanes, earthquakes, and a global pandemic, she was able to finish her master's degree in clinical nutrition and integrative health in 2020. You can listen to her weekly podcasts in Spanish on all of the major platforms. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Ms. Lourdes.
Thank you. Okay, I need you to unshare so I can share. All right. Thanks for having me. I love USBC by heart. And the title of this presentation is The Who Coded in the Context of Puerto Rico and Disasters. As she said, I'm Lourdes Santabaya, and I'm with ASI, Alimentación Segura Infantil. And I do want to disclose nothing except that if I mention any brand names, it's definitely for educational purposes only, and it doesn't imply endorsement. As a matter of fact, it is making it clear that the company is doing it wrong. I do want to give you a historical context of Puerto Rico before I talk about the disasters, the most recent disasters. So if you didn't know, the Spanish-American War, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and Philippines were given to the United States as war booty. Cuba and the Philippines were slowly granted their independence, but Puerto Rico was not. It was maintained as a US territory, primarily because it's a strategic location from a military perspective. It's well located between different countries in the Atlantic Ocean. And it has been the site of numerous medical and agricultural experimentation during its ongoing relationship with the US. We are very much a territory and a colony. And there were also tax codes that permitted US national corporations, including pharmaceuticals, to operate without paying federal taxes, such that our labor was cheap labor for US nationals, and the pharmaceuticals had and continue to have a very strong presence in the United States, in Puerto Rico, and a sort of respect here. Having a pharmaceutical job is like the best job that you could have in the eyes of many people. And our society was deliberately restructured from one that was rural and agricultural to one that's urban and industrial. A lot of opening of factories and industry in the metro area, and a lot of also encouraging Puerto Ricans to move to the United States mainland to do industry there. So a change in the social fabric very dramatically has occurred in the time that we have been the property of the United States. And the fact that Puerto Rican citizens were given US citizenship in order to be able to be drafted into the US First World War, World War I. But it also creates this constant migration, and to some extent is encouraged to depopulate the island, to make the island more accessible to non-natives of the island, and also so that our people are doing labor outside of outside of Puerto Rico in the US. We're very much used to be part of the military structure and the industrial structure. And you may know we're in Hurricane Alley, that's because of where we're located in the Caribbean, but we're also on a major fault line for earthquakes. What does this mean in the context of promoting lactation? I want to stress that our bodies are not ours. They belong to the government and industry. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that parents are often told as soon as their baby is born is that your child is not your property, your child is the property of the state. And we believe that. Agent Orange was first tested in El Yunque rainforest before it was taken to Vietnam. It causes serious health consequences for the people who lived in that community. Monsanto, who created Agent Orange, and it also has the glyphosate, I think, the Roundup, they continue to have a very strong relationship with the island. As a matter of fact, there are laws around individual ability to have property to do agriculture. The idea is not wanting anybody to have a plantation, but those restrictions don't exist for agribusiness. So Monsanto owns a lot of our land to do agricultural. Your pineapples and papayas. Birth control pills were first experimented on Puerto Rican bodies. The first birth control pills were given, and they were 20 times the dose of the birth control pills that are being used in modern day. The first trial population was Puerto Rican women or Puerto Rican people with uteruses. And also were subjected to a massed forced sterilization, which ultimately affected 1/3 of the female population or bodies with fallopian tubes between 1930 and 1970. I really strongly recommend that if you have the opportunity to see a film called La Operación, I asked USBC to put right now the link in the chat, because it talks very much about this whole connection between our bodies, industrialization, birth control pills, and sterilization. These pharmaceutical tax breaks means that formula was being produced and distributed here. And then there was a lot of indoctrination regarding progress. Progress means that we can't have more children. Progress means that we have the formula feed our children, all in the name of the country and in progress. And to this day, sterilization continues to be the most common form of birth control, and formula is the most common feeding method, to such a point that people, I remember when I was pregnant with my second child, they're like, so you're gonna get the operation, right? I do wanna right now, before I show the next slide, I wanna ask people to think, when is the first time you heard the term IYCFE, or infant and young child feeding in emergencies? Oh wait, sorry, well, I'll just ask that question, but it actually didn't go here. But anyway, all right. So I want to give you the birth and lactation background before the hurricanes. And first, to understand that we have a very large economic debt, which is causing a large exodus of families of reproductive age leaving from Puerto Rico to go to the US mainland. 85% of children under the age of 5 in Puerto Rico are eligible for the Women, Infant, and Children program. 75% of young adults under 30 are earning minimum wage or less. The public policy related to SICA, and this was 2016, discouraged having children. So again, there was another mass distribution of durable contraception during that time. And coupled with the exodus in 2016, or before because of the economic crisis, and then the SICA crisis, and then Hurricane Maria, we have had this zero population growth. And that's why I really would love for you to watch this film, La Operación, because you're gonna see that there's been this very deliberate plan to reduce our population and to have us leave. 49% of births in 2018 were by cesarean section. I know in the US it's like 35%, and that's considered a crisis. The 2018 breastfeeding report card, and I'm reading this because we didn't get included in the 2021. Any breastfeeding at 6 months was 47% in Puerto Rico versus 57.6 national average. 12 months was 29.8 versus 35.9%. There was a 26.5% exclusive breastfeeding at 6 months, which is pretty close to the national average, a little bit over, so we're good in that. 19.6% of babies consume formula before day 2. So 20% of our babies off the bat are drinking formula in the hospitals. This is despite the fact that 95% of pregnant people say that they want to breastfeed. And only 1.1% of babies are born in the only baby-friendly hospital on the island. We have one. And many of the biggest obstacle to becoming baby-friendly is formula. And I can say that not only are most of these major hospitals receiving the formula handouts for their nurseries, but there are even hospitals where there are personnel whose salary is being paid by the formula industry. And there's a lot of public-private alliances with the government. For example, Nestle tried to come into my children's school. I have children in public school, to do a healthy children. I don't even know what it was. And this is where I say IYCFE. I asked you, when is the first time that you heard the term IYCFE? And for me, very interestingly, it was in the summer of 2017. And I had remembered that one of the year's World Breastfeeding Week, the theme was breastfeeding in emergencies saves lives, but I hadn't actually heard IYCFE. And I was recruited to do some educational campaigns with people around this subject. And about a month later, Hurricane Irma formed in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And it did affect part of the island pretty severely, but like kind of weird. It hit the northeast. And then this is the track of Hurricane Maria, which came 2 weeks after Irma. And you can see it went right in the middle. And if you compare, if you look here, you see this is the path. You can also see that right here in the middle of the island is where our mountains are. And this is September 2017. So essentially the hurricane ripped through here in the mountain, and all of these areas were completely impassable. The aftermath of the disaster was that for at least 24 hours, this is kind of generous, 100% of the island was off the power grid. And slowly they started to restore electricity. There's some municipalities that did not have power for as long as 10 months. And there's some communities that continue to struggle with their electricity. They're called bolsillos, or pockets. About 75% of highways were impassable for at least 3 weeks. And some communities were 100% cut off from any traffic because bridges and roads were taken away completely by the storm. If you all know what the Jones Act affects, it's a trade act. And what it states is that it also affects Hawaii, Alaska, and the other territories like Puerto Rico and US Virgin Islands and Guam. But anything which is shipped to Puerto Rico has to come out of a US port. So if we want to receive anything from Dominican Republic, which is like 80 miles by ocean, it has to be shipped to the United States and then come to Puerto Rico. And it's actually estimated that the amount of the Puerto Rican debt is equivalent to the amount of money that we would have saved if the Jones Act didn't exist. And that Jones Act was only lifted for 10 days in an emergency where everything was closed and nobody had any food and nobody had access to anything. 10 days. Cell phone towers were also swept away, so we didn't have signal. I had to go to the plaza and hold my phone up like this. And it took months for stores to be stocked and reopened. And obviously the most disenfranchised communities are going to be affected by this situation where the food deserts exist. And WIC, I already told you, 85% of children under the age of 5 are WIC dependent, but it was off the grid and it was closed. In most of the communities, they didn't even open for months and they were operating out of the FAMA offices and making manual checks. This definitely affected us. And so how did we eat? We know that breastfeeding and chest feeding will normally be the safest way to feed your baby, as Malika said. But based on the statistics, like it or not, 74% of babies relied on at least some form of formula feeding. And people couldn't leave their houses or pay for stores, even if the stores opened, because we didn't have electronic access. If you didn't have a stash of cash, you couldn't even use your SNAP card, your bank card, to buy anything in a store. And the lines were eternal, worse than the pandemic lines that you have seen. A lot of families had to seek shelter. And in these communities that were isolated, food was being airdropped, the military meals, but formula literally was falling out of the sky. The local government did not step up, so the private sector really did, and a lot of formula was being distributed. Later, the military came in, and I can tell you from different meetings with the Children's Task Force, formula is an object of discussion. And so it was everywhere, even though water and electricity were not as present. And you know that investing in high skilled lactation service providers after a disaster, sadly, is not normally a priority. Talking about predatory marketing. There's this plot with the formula companies where they want you to be loyal to their brand. So that's why they now have prenatal vitamins. A lot of the stuff that Kimmie was talking about in terms of the targeted marketing is so that you start to think, oh, it has to be this brand. When the fact of the matter is that food is food. If I go to the supermarket and I don't find a certain brand of beans, I'm not going to say, oh, I have to leave. I need to go to another grocery store. I'm going to buy the generic brand. But people believe that if they don't have the brand of formula their baby eats, that their baby will somehow get sick. When the fact of the matter is, if you compare labels, much of it is equivalent. So there were families who would be in line and who were formula dependent. They would be in these food kitchen lines and they would be looking for a specific brand of formula because they're that sold on their product. And as Malika mentioned, the inability to disinfect bottles and teats in a water and power crisis means sick adults and children. I said formula is literally being fallen from the sky and pushed on people. You would say, in my family, there's me and there's the baby, and they're like, oh, what formula do you use? And people who were not trained on safer formula handling were just giving away the formula. To get gasoline for your car, it could be as long as 10 hours. There's no express lines for pregnant people or families with infants and young children. So that means that you could have thought that you were leaving to go get gas for your car, leave your baby with your mother or with your neighbor who got formula from the food kitchen line, and then you come back 10 hours later and right there, breastfeeding is destroyed. Not destroyed, but it's very much threatened. And we know that female and single heads of households tend to be the ones who are like, I'm gonna go and get help, everybody wait here. The formula manufacturers position themselves as heroes, as Malika very well pointed out, when they donate large amounts of infant milks, and nobody's willing to unbrand their products. Nobody's willing to sponsor a conference and not put their name on the program. They want you to know their name so that they can create this product loyalty. And powdered milk, even though it's not the safest, it really is the cheapest to purchase and ship. We're talking about, as Mr. Trump said, big ocean. When you ship liquid infant formula, it makes the plane heavier. So powder is probably going to be the priority. A lot of people think that the WHO code is just for countries in development, you know, these poorer countries. But I want to tell you that this is a scene post Maria right here. We live in the same country that you do. It's just that we're a colony. And economic, racial, and ethnic disparities exacerbate disasters. So yes, the code is important for countries that are still in development and for poorer communities. But we know that any child who is being breastfed or chest fed is healthier despite their economic background than a baby who's being formula fed, especially after a disaster. And hurricane season just started yesterday. The pandemic is still going on and the ground is trembling because in 2020, shortly before the pandemic was declared, or late 2019 to beginning of 2020, we also had a series of devastating earthquakes, which impacted, ironically, the parts of the island that had been devastated by the hurricane, you know, evening things out there. I do want to ask people, because ASI received formula. We didn't ask for it, but it was given to us. And we decided that we were going to start giving it to the families that needed it. But my question to you as lactation specialists is it possible to honor the code and still work with formula? One of the things that I found just becoming an IBCLC is that when I was a peer counselor working for one of these well-known peer counselor organizations, we didn't talk about formula. And people who came and had bottles, as Kimmie mentioned, were kind of ostracized. And if anybody said, well, what kind of formula should I use? Or how much should I use? Or what do I prepare? We would say, ask your doctor. And the fact of the matter is that pediatricians often are formula peddlers. They're like brokers of formula. So I think we need to develop a certain amount of knowledge and cultural humility. Remember, educating one-on-one is not a code violation. If a family comes to me, they're combination feeding, their intention is to relactate, but they're using formula, I am not in violation if I teach them the World Health Organization recommendations of using boiled water. I'm not in violation if they say, oh, I use this brand. And I say, well, I don't have that, but I have this brand. I'm not pushing a brand. Okay, so giving formula to a family isn't a code violation if you're not pushing a brand. Teaching a family how to pace bottle feed isn't a code violation. It's one-on-one education and it could be helpful. And we know that cup feeding is the safest way to feed babies after a disaster, but we also know that there are families who are not going to do it. We do educate a lot about hand expression. It's very important because I would visit families that baby wasn't latching on and say, hey, are you expressing your milk? And they would say, yes, at night when I turn on the generator. So for us, it's very important to teach the importance of hand expression. And we teach about cup feeding. We had an experience going to a shelter after the earthquakes where the family, the shelters after the earthquakes were tent cities. They weren't buildings, they weren't structures. And there was a family that had a young child, it wasn't an infant, but it was a young child that still was bottle fed. And they would put the bottle on the ground, on the soil under their cot. I said hand expression is a vital tool. And if we train communities to educate and help themselves, they don't have to rely on the military to airdrop. They don't have to rely on these outside resources. They can help themselves. And this is what we're trying to stress in ASI. I want to show you this picture because this is an exercise that we do with our community health workers. This is unlabeling and unbranding code violating products. And what basically we did is to make sure that it's in the language that can be read, that it has expiration dates, that explains what the product is and how to prepare it, but it's unbranded. And this is a good exercise to do with community health workers. And it would be great even if we had to distribute formula if we did this. I understand that somewhere like the World Health Organization has unbranded labels. I want to get a hold of some of those. And I also want to say ASI received some negative feedback because we were giving out formula, but this is about humility and this is about comprehension. We weren't pushing formula. We were helping feed babies that already were formula fed. And we know that those families, when they have their next baby, are going to come to us and say, oh, those are the people who helped me with my formula and now I want to breastfeed. or those are the people who helped me do my relactation, and I want to do it this time from the beginning. This is just a little card that we created. I translated into English, but we would distribute these with different relief packages where it explains how to sanitize, how to, that on the one side is breastfeeding and on the other side is formula feeding. And all of it emphasizes the importance of breastfeeding, but it doesn't humiliate any family that formula feeds. I did a little video I could like share with you all on 40 years of the code. Because a lot of people think that the code means that you can't sell or buy or use, and it's about shaming and it's about interfering with the free market. No, it's about public health. It's about helping families. That's the end of my presentation. This is my information. If you want to get a hold of me, they'll put it up, and a shameless plug for my podcast where I also talked about the code on its anniversary. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lourdes, and all of our speakers. We have a little bit of time left for Q&A. Feel free to add your comments or questions into the chat or into the Q&A chat box. And I'm going to start with a question to Malaika. So given the formula dumping that you described that is common during disasters, what actions or relationships do you recommend that community-based organizations undertake in disaster preparedness?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think to begin with, promoting breastfeeding is the best preparedness strategy. Promoting breastfeeding in non-emergency times is vital. And if you're a community-based organization that specializes in perinatal health, or you work with families from pregnancy to postpartum, include education on infant and young child feeding in emergencies in your interactions with your clients. And also ensure that families have access to skilled support. You have a list of lactation support providers or organizations in the community that people can call, breastfeeding circles or support groups that parents can be a part of. And also advocating for hospital systems to include education on infant and young child feeding in emergencies as part of the hospital discharge process, especially during hurricane seasons. That way, you know that the knowledge is being spread, that families are going home with that information. And like Lourdes said, it's important not to ostracize formula feeding families because there are some babies who depend on formula where breastfeeding or chest feeding is not an option. But make sure that these families too are equipped with education and resources that they need ahead of an emergency. Yeah.
That's awesome. So Malaika, just a quick follow-up related to that. I know your organization has these infant ready go bags and other kinds of resources available. It would be awesome if you wanted to put into the chat a link so that people could see what you built and what's available, both how to support your organization, but then also what they might also be able to do in their communities to gather resources to be emergency ready.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'll do that.
Great. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to give the next question to Dr. Bugg. Can you say more about the impact of the crib cards that you showed? You had a picture from a hospital. You said it was fairly recent, and that these, crib cards were concerning. Can you speak a little bit more about, what did that evoke for you, and what's your concern?
So thank you for the question. And what we found, again, in the 1990s is anytime you offer someone both, that sort of puts in their mind that, so I can try this, and if it fails, then I can try, do B, do the other. And so the idea is just that we want the moms to be able to commit to what their intent is. And of course, it's always about their choice. However, we just it's difficult when someone comes in and feels that, well, I want to try this, but if it doesn't work the first time, then I'm going to go on to plan B.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. So next question is for Lourdes. So I know you shared the example of that one card that your organization has made. And there's a question, what other resources would you recommend, whether it's posters, flyers, pamphlets, websites, to be really able to equip people to better respond to disasters? So, folks are thinking about things that could be distributed to community.
Shameless plug for SE. We have like this long thing about breastfeeding in emergencies, or like safe infant feeding in emergencies, that we have it in both English and in Spanish, as well as that little informational card. Maybe Malika can say if they have some information for people who are interested in reading about it. Obviously, there's the core guideline from the IFE, the IFE, the Infant Feeding in Emergencies core group. That's a really good guideline. Breastfeeding in Combat Boots, Mom to Mom Global has a really good resource on its page as well that I think that you could go and look at. So I would recommend those as starting places. Yeah, I'll just write I could even, what I could do, I could give to USBC and maybe they can like send to everybody that resource flyer that's the our safe infant feeding. It's a PDF and it has, oh, it's okay, no, not a problem. But I'll share that so that they can give it as it's like our gift to participants. Not to say it's the best thing ever, but it can give you an idea for how you can make your own resource as well. Because also I think it's good that there be ready-made stuff, but things should be also specific to your community. We at least are very emphatic about using non-binary, gender inclusive language, which is hard in a binary language, but we do it. You're muted.
I hadn't thought about that extra twist, Lourdes, but that's awesome. So, and it's noted in the chat, but the USBC will gather all the suggested resources from the panelists, and the links that have been shared out will all be shared with a recording of the webinar. So the next question, I'm going to just open to any panelist who would, like to take it. We have the question, when or under what conditions is it too late to help a nursing parent relactate if they desire to after an emergency?
It's never too late. However, you have to have realistic expectations. If you never breastfed and your baby is 4 months old, you might get your baby to latch on and produce a little bit of milk. You might have to rely on co-nursing if what you want is for them to get human milk. If the baby was born a week ago, it's going to be a lot easier. So it's never too late, but again, realistic expectations. An 8-month-old baby of somebody who works 40 hours a week, it's going to be a lot harder.
That makes sense. That's perfect nutshell answer, Lourdes. Thank you so much. So we're coming to the close of our time, and we do have a couple USBC announcements. Before we go there, I wanted to address several of the questions that have come up that all kind of fit into the big category. Okay, given all of this, what can we do? And though it might not be the most satisfying answer in this moment, I want to say that this is part of that larger arc that I talked about that USBC is on right now in our learning journey, that's going to lead to a collaborative conversation where we explore together what the will is, the capacity, the interest, the readiness to start to identify the levers for change and what collaborative action could look like on any of these fronts to improve the conditions, and in particular with an eye towards recognizing that there's differences in impacts across communities of things like disasters, things like pandemics, and also things like commercial milk formula marketing. And together, we know that we're very powerful if we put our strategy minds together where our hearts are.